This is the first video in my new trouser construction series. 7 videos properly sectioned. You can find the playlist containing every video in the description of each video. It directly follows on from trouser drafting unless you have your own trouser pattern to use. If you find my videos useful and you like them, and you think others like us would as well, then I suggest you click on the like button so that it's more likely that others like us can find this channel. If you're new here and need a good place to start, then I suggest you start with the Start Here playlist, also in the description. Get yourself up to speed with my intro too, and start making some of the samples first. You need to start by making sure that your fabric is okay, and that you have enough. I rolled out my fabric, selvaged towards me, and laid my front and back pattern onto it. Check the right side, the correct side of the cloth, which is neatly preserved on the inside. Make sure that no threads are pulled anywhere, stains I guess also, and the last thing is to make sure the selvage is lined up. It's important to iron the fabric, thoroughly steam it in order to pre-shrink the cloth so that your trouser won't shrink at all once we start working, or won't shrink undesirably. Lay the patterns you made onto the fabric, and you should be aware of whether the cloth or the pattern, if your fabric has one, goes one way. So whether the cloth has an upside down, and by extension, should you not have enough space to line up the two patterns as is, you could flip one of them horizontally and you'll get the same two patterns, but that wouldn't work if you flip them vertically. Run your hand up and down the fabric because it might have a pile, which manifests in it being smooth one way and rougher the other. You need to make sure that you have at least an extra 5 centimeters below the hem of the patterns, 3 above, and have 2.5 centimeters between them. The most economical way of cutting trousers is to flip one side upside down. Of course, we can't do that if it has a pile or a pattern. The next best way might be to flip one of the patterns over. As a rule, I like to keep the front pattern always the same way up as we drafted it because it keeps fitting up consistent for me. Another important aspect of laying down the patterns is to make sure they are in line with the grain. Maybe the best way of doing this is measuring from the center line of the trouser to the fold or the selvage, whichever happens to be easier for each piece. You're best measuring from one point and then using that as a pivot point to measure the other one. Upon getting them into position, you ought to use some kind of weight to keep everything in place. One time I used bars of soap, another time I used whiskey glasses. At this point, begin to trace around both patterns. Progress as you wish, but be sure to take down all of the balance marks like the seat, knee and construction line between these two. Very importantly, the dart and the front crease line. We don't need the center back line. Using a piece of sharper chalk is best. Don't apply too much pressure. Applying too much pressure will create thicker, less precise lines. It could also move the fabric, changing where the chalk is in the first place. Plus, it'll wear out the chalk more quickly. Try to use the chalk vertically, perpendicular to the cloth. It helps in using the chalk sharply. As you finish copying off the pattern, the paper becomes redundant and you can and should remove it. Inlays are extra cloth we add onto the seams of Bespoke trousers. They are largely unique to Bespoke because they mean we can alter trousers to a larger degree than we could without. However, some inlays include the seam allowances, so until you know which is which based on how I use the pattern I make, you should put them on as I do. Then, when you know, you can remove them as you please. The first inlays that you should draw on are the additional 5 centimeters below the hem and the additional 3 centimeters atop the waistband. These are on both patterns and are all the inlays you need to put on the front trouser. Below the hem, flare out the trouser, which makes it easier to put up. we can use our pattern to properly mirror the runs from the hem. We would add more here if we wanted to do a fitting, and we would cut it down afterwards. On the back pattern, there is an additional 2.5 centimeters of inlay on the outside leg and the inside leg. And it's neat, looking back I almost missed that I had to change the fabric for a minute due to a technical failure. On the seat seam at the top of the back pattern, extend from the waistline 3 centimeters, and that will taper in as it goes down towards the curve. To determine the fly bearer fork notch, the crotch notch, make a right angle at the 4-part curve from the fly line and the crotch. Mark about 45 degrees onto the curve. About halfway between that and where the line begins to be straight again is where you put your notch. For women, the bottom of the straight is better, for genitalic reasons of course. Lower than that for men, in my experience, the zip can be more difficult to operate. It's at this point that you can draw on your trouser pocket. Unless you want a fitting, then that can come later. Should you want a slanted pocket, you need to decide on a slant. I suggest marking the seam allowances under the inlay and around the appropriate part of the side seam. I'm starting the slant 5 centimeters from my side seam, which will be 6 centimeters from the edge of the fabric. Then I decide the length of my pocket, usually 18 centimeters, with 3 centimeters of knot pocket above it. From the point we mark below the inlay, find where 21 centimeters meets the side seam, not the edge, the side seam. That will be our bottom notch, while the 3 centimeter point is our top notch. You can reference my slanted trouser pocket sample video for a more in-depth guide. You may want to replace the weights at this point as you cut the two pieces out. As fabric is cut loose from the patterns, be sure to mark the grain. You're going to use those bits to cut out the other little bits you need from the same fabric. As we're cutting, keep your hand next to where you're cutting to keep the two layers the same size. If you have an island worktop, that's way better because you can move around the table as you cut it. Otherwise, we're stuck contorting ourselves to cut them out. We want to move the cloth around as little as possible for this. As I cut out the front trouser, I also snip into the fork notch so that I don't lose it. The biggest part you need is your waistband. And you don't actually need a pattern for the waistband since it's a rectangle of 6 centimeters by half the waist measurement plus 16 centimeters. It doesn't need to be exactly 6 centimeters wide, it can be wider so long as it has at least one straight edge. It could be a long piece of scrap from the selvage or the folded edge. Always be sure to mark the wrong side, and like I've said previously, the waistband is cut along the same grain as the trouser. This can be a bit complicated because the fly guard needs to be right side up when it's attached to the inside of the right trouser. I laid my left front trouser right side up, or right side trouser right side down, same thing, onto some fabric, still following the same grain. Like I alluded to earlier, I always have my pattern the side up that I drew it, so that the chalked on side is what's facing upwards for this as well. Start by copying off the notch, curve, inlay and waistline, at which point remove the trouser and draw a perpendicular line away from the curve a few centimeters below the notch. Mark points 4 centimeters and 5 centimeters on that line from the curve. You can see the graphic for a clearer picture. From the top, also chalk a line 5 centimeters from your first line. Handrail the first curve to about the halfway point before splitting it into 2 lines. One going to the 4 centimeter point, one to the 5 centimeter point. At this point, extend the waist and inlay lines. Now decide on the shape and dimensions of your fly guard, bearing in mind that this dimension will have a centimeter shaved off when it's bagged out. What is good is about 5 centimeters further from the fly at the top and about 10 centimeters below the bottom of the inlay, which curves into the fly. That's not exactly what I did, but it's what's best and what I suggest with my graphic. Cut into the notch a very small amount as you cut out the pattern. On the piece of fabric that you drew on, cut away the extruded block at the top and also the curve at the bottom. That is your fly. Mark the wrong side of the fly guard. If you get it wrong way round, you'll be somewhat displeased. For the back pockets, should you want them, mark the appropriate pieces that you need. For each double welted back pocket, you'd need 2 jets of 19 by at least 5 centimeters, and the bearer 19 by at least 10 centimeters. Keeping in mind that the jets are cut longside with the grain like the waistband and the bearer is cut perpendicular to the grain. You can see that I unfold the fold of the cloth to cut the bearer here. Here I cut a belt loop to put it on the center back of my trouser, and you can see that that is cut with the grain as well. Blind and facings for your front pockets also need to be cut. Lay your trouser over some fabric, and if it's a pattern fabric and a slanted pocket, then definitely be sure to line up the pattern. Trace around the outside, carry on and an extra 10 centimeters down from the bottom notch of your pocket, I'd say. Copy both notches off as well. Mark the waistline, pocket slant, and the top notch. This one will be the blind, also referred to as the big facing, and I worry that I will get tired of saying that this is bespoke clothing that you're making, so they can be whatever shape or dimension you want, but for now I'm marking a point 3 centimeters down from the lower notch, and then I'm adding 9 centimeters on behind the slanted pocket line. It's quite large so that my pocketing will not show at all if the pocket gapes open. To make the facing, aka the small facing, copy off the waistline and its inlay again, copy off the notches and copy off the slant, and a few centimeters of the side seam below the bottom notch as well. Take away the trouser to measure down 1 less centimeter than you did for the blind. It's not totally necessary to do 1 less, but this way the seams won't be sitting on top of one another. The same idea is employed adding 4 centimeters behind the slanted line. The facing can be smaller since it's less likely to gape anyway. We also add 1 centimeter in front of the slanted line for seam allowance. Having cut them out, you'll do well to mark the notch and waistline on both, and then the slanted pocket line on the blind, being sure to mark the wrong sides. For the side adjusters, I have the pattern I made in the waistband video. Well, not the same one, my normal one, but my point stands. We can trace it off alongside with the grain, marking the wrong sides and splitting them into their 4 pieces. Or I was supposed to mark the wrong sides anyway. To cut the pocket bag, you need Silecia. You need it doubled like normal and then folded. What I'm doing is measuring about how much space my pocket is going to take up so that I can fold the fabric in an economical manner. I am checking the width of the trouser from 2.5 centimeters past the center front line and adding 3 centimeters. That is about how much I want folded over. I know the height of my pocket, so I mark that on 2. I think that 40 centimeters is a good height. Lay your trouser onto the Silecia and maneuver it until the fold of the Silecia comes to where you want it. Usually the top of the pocket is at the same point as the center front line, and the bottom is an inch past the crease, the bottom of the Silecia being 37 centimeters below the inlay. Trace around the trouser, trace off the notches, pocket line and chalk on the waistline. Remove the trouser and mark down the amount you added to the bottom of the big facing or the blind plus 1 centimeter from the bottom notch, or half a centimeter for a cleaner result, so I'll mark down 3.5 centimeters. From there you can draw the shape that you want the pocket to be. From the same point, draw the inlay 3 centimeters out from the side seam edge all the way up to the waistband inlay. Add a centimeter seam allowance to the slant and draw a horizontal line out from the notch. We are going to cut this section off of one side of the pocket. You could cut it out at this point. Make sure that you unfold it so that you're only cutting one side, giving you the asymmetrical shape. Cut the Silecia for the fly and fly guard. You only need one of each. Lay the fly onto the Silecia and copy off the outer curve, the one without the notch. Extend it a bit above the top and bottom and take away the fly. Measure into the proverbial fly by 3 or 4 centimeters along our curved line to cut the piece out. It's more economical cutting Silecia like this than on the bias. The piece for the guard needs to more than eclipse the fabric, especially above the inlay. We need it to extend above the waistband, so add at least 3 centimeters or so on the top. Cut the curtain and waistband lining. These can be Silecia or lining, though I think it's a bad idea to make the waistband lining from lining. It requires an extra step when attaching it, so hold fast on that for now, methinks. For the width of the curtain, it's double the height you want plus 2 centimeters. I've chosen 14 centimeters plus 2, which is 5 3/4 inches. I suggest cutting it on the fold of the fabric because it is mostly used as one long piece, and we can take what we want from it and we can keep and reuse it in later trousers. What we need though is half the waist measurement plus 20 centimeters for inlay. The waistband linings are the same dimension as the waistband. We can cut it in one long piece or 2 pieces. I will do 2 because it's easier to interpret how to do 1 long from 2 rather than 2 from 1 longer. Again, we can keep and reuse the extra in other pairs of trousers. The crotch guard reinforces the seat seam, like we've all had a pair of trousers split open on us. Here's your preventative measure. Cut 2 squares parallel and or perpendicular, same thing, to the grain, about 15 by 15 centimeters. Fold it in half across the diagonal. With pinking shears, we'll cut a triangle away from one of the edges, or if you can't, just cut a zigzag line. To cut out your back pockets, 19 by 30 centimeters, I am curving the bottom edges and tapering the top. On one of the pieces, I will mark 9 centimeters down from the top edge and cut that away. This will leave me with less bulk in the pocket and waistband later. For this method we also need to cut a piece of linen about 19 by 6 centimeters. I'm making half-line trousers, so we want to press and steam the lining to make it shrink and discolor as much as possible before putting it in the trouser. On doubled up lining material, lay the front trouser on the lining in the most economical way possible, with the selvage being around 15 centimeters, exactly 5 inches, coming from an exceptional trouser maker I interned with, below the knee or a bit above it. The selvage, because it is the least bulky way of making sure it doesn't fray. Cut it roughly with at least a few centimeters on each side, cutting it perfectly flush at the top, so we know where to line it up. If the selvage isn't an option, then the next best thing is to pinking shear along the bottom edge. We need 2 lengths of band roll canvas that are just the same length as the waistband fabric. Out of linen, on top of the 6 by 19 piece for the back pocket, we should cut 2 pieces for our slanted pockets. 3 centimeters by more than the length of the pocket, say 19 to 21 centimeters. That said, we'll also need linen for the fly and fly guard. As I mentioned in the trouser accoutrements video, I also need the zip, a pair of buckles, catch-ons, the hook and bar, a button, plus another button for my hip pocket, some 3 by 3 centimeter squares of fusing, and silk for finishing. I also keep my inside leg and waist measurement. These are important for making. We might also have a heel and toe inside leg measurement for slanted hems. I'm keeping all these little bits in a Ziploc bag. This is everything we need for these trousers. We can bundle it up and tie it up with some of the leftover selvage. And I think it's quite pleasant to look at like this.